Excellent way to start the show.
What a great way to start the show. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. And we were just having a fascinating conversation about something that me and Christy actually talked about during our live stream this past week, where we were talking about the Hateful Eight specifically, but we also talked about the number of times that Quentin Tarantino likes to use the N-word in his scripts, and I worked out that he used the N-word. There were 1.5 N-words per minute in Django Unchained.
That's crazy.
Which is just ridiculous.
That's more than any hip hop song.
Yeah, right. Like when rappers are like, "Whoa."
Yeah.
Too many. But Geek, I think you asked like how many of those were said by Quentin Tarantino himself.
Yeah.
In Django, I would have to go back and rewatch it. I mean, Tarantino does have a character in that movie. He plays like the weirdly Australian guy who appears for like one scene. And it's like, why did Tarantino cast himself as an Australian when he's not? He clearly can't do that accent and is barely an actor, but whatever.
But he's the director, so that's why.
So yeah. So he may have said it. I can't remember him saying it, but I think I've only watched Django once. So he may have said it and I just can't remember if he did or not. But I mean, he definitely said it a couple of times in Pulp Fiction. So you know.
Oh yes, exactly.
Yeah.
That's why it's just like it's most likely the Quentin Tarantino movie, the Star Trek movie, is not going to happen. But I'm thinking it's like I think that'd be a good thing because I'm not sure. I don't want to hear the N-word in my Star Trek unless they go back to the past where it's kind of like appropriate as a war in time.
Yeah,
I couldn't think of any established character doing that. So if it was like a totally different ship in a totally different part of the universe in a totally different time stream, it might be fine. But
if Tarantino,
the N-word coming out of Picard would just be.
If Tarantino were writing it, and I alluded to this on Twitter the other day, if Tarantino were writing it, I can easily imagine Dr. McCoy calling Spock a space N-word.
I'm still trying to picture.
You green-blooded space.
I'm not saying I want that to happen. That would be, but if Tarantino were writing it, that's like right exactly where my mind goes. And I feel like Tarantino, like it's like the computer, you know what I mean? Like when he's thinking about it, he's like, where can I put N-words in my Star Trek script? And he's like, Dr. McCoy would call Spock one. You know what I mean? He's like figuring it out in the early stages of writing the draft.
Well, I'm still trying to get over that image of Picard going like, "What up, Negro?"
Oh my God, Captain, please.
Quick point.
I've been watching a lot of Star Trek lately. Just from all the different series, and keep in mind, none of this really has to do with nostalgia because I didn't grow up with Star Trek. Like, okay, now and then an older family member would want to play one of the movies, and I'd watch it, but I didn't really know what was going on, just that the characters stood around talking funny.
You've pretty much got it.
But recently I've been watching, and I've been like sampling from different series, and I have to admit, my favorites are that era of The Next Generation, DS9, Voyager. I even like some things about Enterprise, but I don't care much for the recent Treks, not even Picard, and it's not for a reason that you might expect. It's the action. I've never liked the action in Star Trek, except maybe some of the movies, but I mean like the older ones. But I feel like with the Abrams films, that was a huge paradigm shift. Star Trek became more of an action series, more of a Star Wars-like thing, and I don't care as much for that. The stuff that's really riveting to me are where they're just talking about ethical stuff or explaining how technology works. There's all that stuff. There's a softness to those older series. Well, it's almost like you're watching a play. And I just don't care for how flashy and aggressive modern Trek is, like even the Picard
How
suit.
Awesome it is.
How awesome
in
it
a
is.
Michael Bay sense.
There were a couple of scenes in the most recent season of Discovery where it was scenes of characters sitting across from each other at conference tables, and I was like, now this is Star Trek.
Yes. I do think these new series are very good. I'm just not as able to immerse myself in them because it's more of a typical sci-fi thing than just the cheerful, charming optimism of older Trek.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, even okay, my favorite is the original series.
Yeah,
and there's a dearth of action in those. In part because they didn't have the budget to do it, but you ended up getting more cerebral stuff because special effects were expensive, and like my favorite episodes, the Enterprise incident, Balance of Terror, and Taste of Armageddon. Very little action in any of them. Taste of Armageddon probably has the most.
It's like, I don't care that Data can bend steel bars with his hands, but Data building himself a daughter and going through the experience of like raising somebody, yes, that's fascinating.
Yeah, and I'll go with you as far as this goes. I mean, I do think the more, for me personally, the more memorable, or the episodes of the newer shows that have stuck with me longer and that I enjoyed more than the others, were the ones that were less action oriented. Like the episode of Picard where Nepenthe, where he visits the Rikers. And I mean, there's action elsewhere in that episode, but the main story is Picard just kind of hanging out with Riker and Troy and kind of, centering himself and figuring out what the next step is. And, and it's mostly a pretty quiet, character centered episode. And then also in Discovery in season 2, there was the episode, where Saru goes through the change and he thinks he's going to die, but it just turns out to be like a metamorphosis to like his species' next natural stage of life that they were never allowed to get to because they were always killed off before they got to that point. And again, there is some action in that as well, but the heart of it is this, character based thing. And, I tend to enjoy those episodes of the new stuff more than although I also have to say the action is incredibly well done. I mean,
I know this must sound silly, to nitpick over that kind of thing.
No, not at all.
No, not at all.
To sum it up in one sentence, the action was always a low point for me. So when there's more of it,
Well, but that's the whole thing. That's the whole thing. That's actually why I don't like those as well. Because if you look, a lot of the old episodes are morality plays. Again, Taste of Armageddon is a morality play. A Private Little War is a morality play. Measure of a Man, The Offspring. These are all morality plays. And they're amazing. And again, there's no action in Measure of a Man. It's a court drama.
Oh, Duet,
definitely.
One Duet, thing I wish Star Trek would do that it's never really
there's
tried.
action in Duet. I just watched it, so I know this.
Somebody got stabbed.
Exactly.
At the very end. But Nick, your point?
One thing I would like to see Star Trek go, one place I'd like to see it go that it hasn't really yet, that is kind of unexplored, is going a few centuries ahead of, like Picard's generation. Because so many series, we keep going back to Kirk's era, or, just staying in the TNG era. And I would like to see something that's more like the Enterprise J. Let's jump a few centuries ahead. See how crazy the architecture and uniforms and the cultures get. See how the Federation is probably changing that time. Have a crazy new ship. That's what I. And
the other advantage there is that it's a lot easier. There's less to worry about as far as canon, because it's like, okay, whatever happened back there happened, but we're doing new stuff, so we can break all the rules because we, and even the people that really stick on canon, it's easier, even they're at peace because it's like, all right, well, they've discovered a whole lot of new stuff, so the old rules don't apply.
There's a sort of a built-in excuse. I am looking for, one of the things I'm really looking forward to about one of the upcoming shows, which is Strange New Worlds, is that and I hope I take them at their word, and I believe them, because like I'm someone who has mostly enjoyed the new stuff, even though I've had problems with it that I've talked about, and I don't think any of it has been perfect. Every season of the new shows has had really serious pacing problems, that I've noticed, but overall I've enjoyed it. But Strange New Worlds is the producers and the actors, everybody has repeatedly said it's going to be a return to a more episodic format, that it's not going to be as much of a season-long saga, where each episode is more like a chapter in a book than a standalone story. And I really hope that turns out to be the case, because if there's one major complaint that I would make about the new stuff, that applies to all of it. So except for Lower Decks. Lower Decks is kind of off in its own corner, but but the new live action stuff is that they've all so far tried to do like big epic season long story arcs, to the point where the season long arc takes precedence over whatever the story is of the individual episodes. And so you're kind of locked in where you're betting an awful lot on how the season long story turns out. And if that turns out to be underwhelming, the whole show kind of suffers for that.
What I am very intrigued by is Prodigy. Some kids on some slave planet outside the Federation's jurisdiction come across a crashed Federation ship and just hijack it and flee the planet. That's going to be interesting.
I love that, because that seems like the kind of random fun that I think the franchise could use more of. I mean, like the idea of a bunch of random characters just finding a starship and taking it and flying off on adventures or whatever. Like that's like, I that's one of the things I talked about in the video I did recently about the different parallel Earths, is like there's a level of making it up as you go along wackiness that the franchise lost after TOS that I would love to see it get back a little bit of.
Well,
sorry, go ahead.
I'll say one thing that I think, to your point about the overarching arc. I mean, now obviously, like Babylon 5 is my favorite show, so that was a show built around. But even there, they had struck a balance, and I think DS9 did the balance well as well. Is that you had these overarching arcs, but you still had the episodic things. Like life is still going on inside of this arc.
Yeah, I've been watching Babylon 5, Joe, the last couple of weeks. I mean, I'm
You mentioned that on social media.
Yeah, I'm like a little bit further than midway through season 3. I mean, and I watched it all back when it originally aired, so but I haven't watched it since, really.
That show has amazing spaceship design. So many of them are truly alien. They don't look like something we would make, even though they all were.
And you're right. I mean, it does have, I think so far it has really struck that balance between episode stories and longer stories really, really well. Because you're right. Most of the episodes of Babylon 5 do not feel like incomplete stories. They feel like the episode itself has a beginning, a middle, and an end, but there's also stuff going on that applies to things that are carried across multiple episodes or carried throughout the entire season or from one season to another, and it usually strikes that balance really, really well.
Well, and to that regard, the one thing that I think that, and I remember when I was reading the script books that he put out, is that he said, okay, whenever they would get into some hot and heavy story arc stuff where there's several episodes in a row where they're kind of continuing, each one's a continuation of the previous one, and he purposely would put in something to like break it up. Because you mentioned about the pacing about the Star Trek series, because it's not just a problem pacing within an episode, but there's just pacing within episode to episode.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely. I mean, that was like your problem that you had with like the newer shows, as it were, because like some people would think that like just make more episodes of like Discovery or Picard or something like that, to if they have the filler episodes, as we really call it, and something like that. But then that would like drag on the season 2, and then could, in a sense, affect the pacing of those season arcs. Because if you try to stretch out to like 26 episodes, you will get the pacing problems there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my suggestion for all of them so far has been fewer episodes. I mean, I think Discovery, and again, I really like Discovery. I think it has had, I think each season has been an improvement, and I've enjoyed it a lot. But I mean, it does kind of drag a little bit in spots, and also, and this I think applies to Picard too. All of the seasons have been really backloaded in terms of like important story revelations for like the big story, and it's like you're holding everything back until the last episode or a couple of episodes, and then come the revelations and the explanations, and here's what's really going on, and the big twist, and et cetera, and it's like you're backloading it so far that if these things don't work, if they don't play the way you want them to, then it feels like the whole season has been a waste of time up to that point.
Yeah, but not even that. I mean, that's if I'm getting interested in it, and nothing's happening and nothing's happening, and the episode stories are weak, I'm not going to continue. I don't continue with my books. If everything is going to be, if the author is counting on me to read through 300 pages of, stuff kind of going on that might be leading somewhere, I'm not going to get past page 50. So I got there are other books to read, there are other shows to watch, there are other things to do, and I'm not Trek fan. So
that was the problem.
Pull me in.
That was one of the problems with The Mandalorian. I felt was that there was because it was like one, and overall I like the series. The series, I like both seasons, but there's a lot of like, it felt like a video game. Like, this is the fetch quest for this episode, and then all that does is lead to the next fetch quest, and it's like, and they could have. They should probably have fewer episodes as well. Instead of 8, do 6, and like Loki. Loki was like to me it was like a nonstop. It built and then it was just like.
What also bugs me about so much media nowadays is the power creep, where every new threat has to be bigger than the last one, and it gets to a point where I just can't relate to it anymore. It's like, okay, I like the Borg, but I like it more in episodes like where we're meeting one like Hugh. I don't care so much about the universe destroying stakes of Trek as just what characters are going through on any random day. What personally concerns them. That's more interesting to me because that's more relatable. But like we see this power creep problem with all sorts of series, like Star Wars. Let's look at how this escalates. Okay, we got this big ass space station that can blow up an entire planet. Okay, it's gone. All right, well here's one that's about twice as big and can fire before it's even finished. All right. Oh wait, now we've hollowed out an entire planet and slapped a barrel in the core, and just the barrel is the same size as the old Death Star. Oh, but wait, now it turns out a few years later, Death Star laser technology has become so streamlined and so compact that we can just slap them on the bottom of ships. So we're going to blow up all the planets. And it just eventually you reach a point where the destruction and the death tolls are so cartoonishly, catastrophically high. I just can't grasp it anymore. I expect God to step in or something.
Exactly.
And I mean, it gets very repetitive. And, for me, a more interesting story would have been dealing with the political and economic fallout of the destruction of one planet. I mean, there's that's a huge resource loss. And it's, being one of the central planets, that's also going to be a huge political issue as well, to have that, all of a sudden that power vacuum in, what would have been the Senate. How do they deal with that? But of course, it's not as explodey. It doesn't,
it's still hilarious to me that so much money was poured into building the first Death Star that blowing it up crashed the galactic economy.
Well, and the thing about the power creep that you mentioned, Nick, that I think a lot of the producers and the writers of these big sort of tentpole franchises that keep upping the ante lose sight of is, like, to take Star Wars as an example. The original Star Wars doesn't work because Luke saves the galaxy. It works because we care about Luke, and he has his moment of triumph. You know what I mean? Like it
works because Luke saves his father.
If you care about that, but I mean, I'm talking about the original Star Wars, not Empire or Jedi. I mean, just the original, the movie Star Wars that is called Star Wars. And I will go, and I will die on this hill. The name of the movie is Star Wars.
Yes,
and it's the only movie in the franchise called that. But anyway, but it works because we're invested in Luke, and it's Luke's story. It's the farm boy who dreams of a larger world, and then gets to go out and have an adventure in that world, and he overcomes his obstacles and adversity, and is able to save the day and destroy the Death Star and save the galaxy. But it matters because we care about Luke, not because he saved the galaxy. I don't give a shit if he saves an imaginary galaxy. They're fake people. Let them kill them all. I don't care. I care about Luke.
Steve,
I care about Luke.
Luke's a fake person too.
Yes, but I care about him. But I'm invested in his story. I'm invested in his story, not because I care about the fates of a bunch of imaginary people I've never seen because the movie didn't show me, but because I want Luke to succeed, because I care about Luke.
It's just hilarious to me how by the end of the film, he 2 days, within the span of 2 days, he goes from his normal life to having a kill count in the hundreds of thousands.
He blew up an entire space station full of people.
Only counts as one.
And talk about power creep right there.
Yeah.
Well, see,
He's too powerful. Please nerf.
Well, that's why I'm glad from what I'm hearing about what's happening in the next couple of phases in Marvel is they're not trying to make the next bad. It's basically going to be Kang. It's going to be Gore the God Butcher, and they're going to be recurring enemy again, which is good. And that they're not going to like, well, these ones aren't going to like make the universe, destroy the universe more somehow,
Right. They're not trying to one up Thanos. They're not going right to Galactus and say this guy's even worse. It's like,
Snap's gonna take out 3/4 of the galaxy.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Radical Bacon in the chat. I wonder if the Galactic Empire's Veterans Affairs is as convoluted as the U.S.
Oh man, do you think the Empire has a VA? I don't think the Empire has a VA.
One thing that's really funny, you're gonna find this. Oh,
exactly.
So here's a funny story. I'm paraphrasing mostly from what I heard Spoonie, Noah Antweiler say in one of his videos years ago. But he was talking about like tabletop RPG campaigns and Star Wars and all the Legends novels and such. And there was this one called Dark Saber, and the whole premise of it's like there were so many stories in that time before the prequels where so many writers wanted to make their own Death Star. There was a prototype one that was a little smaller and was basically just a frame of it. And in this case, you had this crime family, I think they were Hutts, who are like, okay, look at this. We got the Death Star plans. And it is either like, boss, we can't build the Death Star. We don't have that kind of money. And he's like, I don't want to build the whole space station. I want the gun. I just want the laser. We'll slap a couple of rockets on it, a hyperdrive, and we'll just we'll just hustle people. We'll just hold people's planets hostage with it. And there's like, hey, that's a good idea, boss. So yeah, it's still expensive, but I don't need to build a whole station to do it. And you know what it looks like when it fires? It looks like a lightsaber. That's the dark saber to you.
Okay,
it's so stupid.
That's hilarious. Funny. Well, it's just like how they got away with it in Rogue One, where they said like, oh, well, we're going to use the Death Star, but we're only going to use like one gun. We're not going to, and we're just going to use it to blow up a city. We're not going to use it to blow up a planet. So technically, we're still preserving, the specialness of when they use it to blow up planets. That was
still an extinction level event.
Oh
that planet's surface is fucked.
Oh yeah, it's not good for the environment when you just blow up a whole city like that all at once.
Oh no, asshole first things. But speaking of Star Wars, a coworker of mine,
Death Star lasers.
A coworker of mine, actually saw this on Facebook. Actually walked all the way to me and showed me to that photo that I posted in from my Twitter into our chat and also into the live chat. Because we all seen that T-shirt of the "Come to the Dark Side. We have cookies." Well, someone wanted to find the truth out and see what it is.
See, one thing too, I was thinking about the other
Poor
Star Wars
Cookie
movies.
Monster.
You mentioned Rogue One. It's like a movie that didn't need to happen to explain away a plot hole that isn't actually a plot hole.
Yeah,
because
but the reason why Rogue One works is because for me anyway. I mean, is that it tells a story that is a good story. I agree with you. I mean, as most people know, I don't give a shit about canon. I don't give a shit about plot holes if the movie's good enough to make me forget about them. Like, I wasn't crying out for any of this to be explained.
No.
But the movie has a good enough
world building.
Yeah, exactly. Fuck it. Who cares? Just tell a story. Don't worry about
it.
Hey, some people are not interested in telling a story. They're interested in world building. But anyway,
just make it up. Just make it up as you go along when you need it. But anyway, that's just
so fascinating.
That's just how I roll. But anyway, the bit about Rogue One sort of filling in little gaps of the backstory is like the least interesting part to me. I care about the characters and the story as it's told. And, it's just like if somebody pitched, if I was like in charge of Star Wars and somebody said, I have a great idea for a movie that explains why Chewie didn't get a medal. Like, well, it had better be a great story because I don't give a shit about that.
Because I already got an explanation for why they didn't give Chewie a medal. Speciesism.
Racism.
Well, here's imagine what it's like to have to write with this guy.
We don't need to retcon every mistake, George.
Well, and again, in the case of Rogue One, like the exhaust port is not a mistake. It's not an error. It's not a plot hole. Because if you have to have these things, scientifically, it makes, from an engineering perspective, it made sense that it was there, and it was tiny, and they didn't think anyone would know about it, and it was ray shielded. So they, the odds of Luke could only do what he did because he used the Force. So
never tell me the odds.
It's only 2 meters wide. That's impossible, even with a computer.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah, it's supposed to be difficult. Yeah,
exactly. So and that's why the Empire didn't take it seriously. They also didn't take. They also explained they didn't take. They didn't take snub fighters to be a serious threat.
And Luke just barely hits it. Yeah. So it's not like it was this glaring weak spot that they were like, oh shit. No, Luke hits it by that much.
Right.
In the final seconds.
Also shown to be, dismissive of the whole space magic thing.
Right.
Right. Even when it gets them, killed by the really scary looking dude.
Well, and also, and plus, you think about it, Red Leader used the computer and missed.
Just a peck on the surface. Nick, you have a point. Nick.
This is why I appreciate Rogue One, because I don't care as much about world building as just like what the characters themselves are immediately going through either. That's why I try not to obsess over world building in my stories. But I do appreciate the context Rogue One provides just as a backdrop, because it really shows just how impossible it was for that, how many things had to line up for Luke to make that shot. It just showed like how I don't know how scary the Empire really was.
That's a point. Although, like the Han Solo one.
Oh, Radical Bacon. I'm sorry.
Here's where he got his gun. Someone just said, "Here, you have a gun."
Yeah.
Really?
Well, that's that was a problem I had. And even though I like all of the J.J. Abrams Kelvin timeline Star Trek movies, but one of the things that I still sort of, like with the first one where it's like an origin story for how all of the characters on the classic Enterprise met. And I'm just like, do we need an origin for this? Can't it just be that they were all assigned there because they all work for like
Chekhov was assigned there.
They work for like a military organization, and this is just their next mission. Like, why do we need to know? Like, gee, ever wonder how Dr. McCoy and Kirk met? No, I never want to. I don't care.
Get together for the new.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, what a coincidence! They both were on the same shuttle going to join Starfleet at the exact same time. I mean, it's not that big of a deal because it's a good movie. But when I think about it, that's the kind of little retconny, like nitpicky stuff that gets on my nerves. Because I'm like, just like with Rogue One, it's like, you ever wonder about the thermal exhaust port and why blah blah blah. It's like, I don't give a shit. Why do you need to explain this? This has nothing to do with story. This is just bullshit backstory nerd stuff that is fun to argue about and is fun to speculate about. Just like the thing like Dana brought up.
What matters?
Like Dana brought up a minute ago about how like nobody believes in the Force, even though Darth Vader literally uses it to kill people in front of witnesses multiple times. But like, and it's like that's fun for that's fun for like. I mean, it's I love talking about that stuff. But if I were going to sit down and write a story for a Star Wars movie, I don't give a fuck about any of that. I give a fuck about my characters and my story.
Well, at the same time, I would argue that at least for Rogue One, the thermal exhaust port, that was just the excuse to write a good story.
Yeah, and that's why it worked.
That was sort of the carrot being dangled out in front of the fanboys who are just like who are into those nitpicky details, and then use that to pull in and have a very character-driven story.
Yeah.
Well, and I agree there. The thing that gets me, it's like if you're gonna have something about the nitpicky details, make them interesting. Like the fact that Han getting his gun was that like mundane. So literally, you didn't need to tell. If it's that mundane, you don't need to tell me. Or same thing like the fact, it's like his name was just Han and he was by himself, so now he's Han Solo.
Yeah, that's the worst one. It's like we don't need an origin for his name. We've established that people in this galaxy have wacky names. Like we don't need.
I would assume that custom agent has just been handing out the weirdest, ridiculous names to everyone that goes through.
Exactly.
One thing
He's a frustrated novelist.
One thing
who never had time for a wife.
One thing I try to do with like any world building that's like within the text of my stories themselves is I try to dress it up so it doesn't feel like exposition. Like one of the setups that pisses me off so much, and you see this in so many pieces of media. It's one of the laziest ways to explain your world. Is you have a museum or a mausoleum or something, and you have some people there, and someone asks the tour guide, "Hey, how did our world get to be the way it is?" Which is like asking, "Why do we have cars?" And the tour guide goes, "Well, as you know," I'm like, "As you know, if it's common knowledge in that world, it's redundant for them to re-explain it."
As you know, and this is for the audience.
So that's why I have a scene in the first book of my series where the main character, she would already know this, so it's not being explained to her. But while she's sitting in one room waiting for a job interview, the door's open, and right next to her is like a preschool. And you see these kids who are learning a lot of this for the first time, and they're watching like a documentary about merfolk. And it even makes sense for it all to be perfectly recited when they're watching something than if a teacher were to just explain it off the cuff. So we are basically sitting on the character's shoulder, watching her, watching them, watching this. So it seems like a really roundabout way to have exposition, but what makes it
a little more natural. One thing I was thinking about with the name, though, would have been funny, is if his explanation, if he had done something like, because I'm, there's just all these Star Trek name generators, like, oh, take your name backward plus this and move that around. If he actually did, like, what's your mother's name? What's your father's name? And he started using one of those things to come up with the name.
This is your name now.
I'm building on what Nick said. There are ways of making it matter more. I mean, you're using essentially the "as you don't know," Bob. But as a teacher, you do start out with what somebody knows, as you know, here's this, but building on that, you use that to sort of build on what they don't know. And another possibility is, especially if you have somebody telling them, is to have that person, have that moment be later on revealed as a character establishing moment, because that person is telling you their version of what they believe and what they know. And there are going to be limitations to that. And so you find out later that it's not just about the world building, which it gives you some insight into that that lets you continue on. But then later on, you find out that there are holes to the story.
Yes.
Well, so-and-so said this. Well, yeah, that's because, they didn't experience thus and such. Or that's because they are a member of this sect and that's what they believe. Mm-hmm. So it can be a way to expand on the world building later so that it's not a big info dump here. You get a little bit here, but it also ends up establishing character as well.
Just like in The Last Jedi, where it's like we first see it from like Luke's perspective of what happened, and then we see it from Kylo Ren's perspective, and then we see the more accurate perspective, as it were, and closer to like the truth, as it were, and that happened in the progression of the story as we lead to the finale, the climax as well.
I'm sorry.
There's a scene like that in Battlefield Earth where we see which when Johnny Goodboy Tyler gets captured by the Cyclo, and you see the scene from Johnny's perspective. Of course, he doesn't speak the language, so he's just like, well, there's this big monster catching me. I don't know what's going on. And then they do the same thing from the perspective of the Cyclo, or maybe it's the other way around. But in either case, they literally do the same. So there's 2 chapters in a row that they're the identical events, just one seen from different perspective, and it was pretty cool.
I love that we brought Battlefield Earth into this, by the way.
I'm sorry. It really is just the tour guide museum setup that I just find it so clunky and lazy. But so many people start their stories with a scene like that.
And I know Geek, were you the one who recommended the podcast Behind the Bastards to me?
Yes.
Because I
mentioned it.
Yeah, I know you've mentioned it. Did you listen to one of the more recent? I think it's the most recent episode where they're talking about Steven Seagal's book.
No, I haven't. I need to catch up on it
because some of the episodes I guess if he has like if he because there's 2 episodes per week, and I guess if he only does like if he only has enough for like a 1-parter, then sometimes for the second episode that week they'll read like a book or something, and they were reading Steven Seagal's novel called The Way called The Way of the Shadow Wolves. And it sounds just absolutely dreadful. It sounds absolutely dreadful. But you just reminded me of it, or this conversation reminded me of it. Speaking of like the tour guide scene that Nick was talking about, there's apparently the first scene in Way of the Shadow Wolves is the main character sitting in a movie theater watching a documentary about that contains like some important exposition. So the first scene of the book is the writer describing a documentary that the main character is watching. And it's like, oh my God. So you're reading about a guy watching a movie. It's like the least literary thing, and strangely enough, the least cinematic thing that you could possibly imagine as a way to start a story. And it's like, holy shit, this is bad. Like,
so Nick, I'm curious. Have you seen the Book of Life? Del Toro's
I have not
foray into animation.
Was that Del Toro, the Book of Life? But that's a similar movie that's like similar to Coco.
Not Coco. Book of Life.
It's different, yes.
So,
I haven't.
If not, I would highly recommend it. It's good. And there is a museum element to it, but I think it does it well. And that's what makes it
well, you can do it,
then it's okay.
You can do that kind of thing well. Like I think a lot of people think the best example is the chalkboard scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where it's like it's pure, it's nothing but exposition. It's just Indy telling one of the characters and also us like what we need to know about the Ark of the Covenant. It's pure exposition, but they run through it really quick and it's well performed, and within the context of the story it makes sense that Indy would be explaining this to these people. So that there are ways to do it well, but yeah, more often than not, it's just like, why are they telling each other things that they already know?
And I would actually disagree about it being pure exposition as well, because it actually, the way he teaches it informs the character as well.
Yeah, you're right.
Is that the one, or is it another scene where the girl's blinking at him? She has love you.
That's another scene. That's when he's actually teaching his class. Yeah.
I love that. It's so terrible. It's awful.
Well, it's like, hey, I don't know why he had a problem with that when he didn't mind Marion being so young.
Yeah.
Because it's the power issue. It's the power issue because he is in his role as a teacher at that moment, and he can't. It's inappropriate for that moment, and for him to respond is inappropriate. He could lose his job, and so that makes him uncomfortable, and
he would lose his job. That makes sense.
Yeah, he would. Hilarious.
I would lose my job.
I'm just saying he's a creep either way.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, totally.
But
totally.
To Dana's point from before, though, it makes sense that you don't have to tell the audience or the reader everything all at once. It's okay if they don't know everything right off, or even if they're a little confused, as long as they're not like turned off by it. So this way, in fact, that may actually create them, to be even more. Well, what's going on? I don't quite understand this. What's going on? Maybe look into it a little further.
Yeah. Well, that's a storytelling technique that I almost always admire when I see it, is when you're able to tell a story with very, very little exposition, but in a way that is still able, you're still able to follow it. You don't feel, because you could take it too far the other direction where the audience just feels lost. You're like, I don't have any idea what's going on. I don't care about any of this. But if you can thread that needle where you're telling the story in such a way that the audience has enough information to know what to care about and to get invested in it and to care what happens next, but you're not just dumping exposition on them, that it's a sign of a really skilled storyteller and of a lot of confidence, because you're trusting that the audience is with you. You don't have to stop everything and say, okay, here's why this is important.
You don't have to have an entire chapter describing Paris.
Right.
What?
Right. Exactly.
It can also be very visual,
or as I like to call it, the Luc Besson way.
It helps if it's a visual medium like it helps if it's a visual medium like comics or movies. But so much world building can just be in like the food that people eat, the fictional brands you see plastered on buildings, the types of vehicles people use, and how fancy or rundown they are. Well, the kind of clothes people wear, your disparities, all that.
But I mean, when you're dealing with written works, you have to essentially, it's very much like poetry. It's about paring down, because you're not going to describe everything. You don't have that opportunity, especially now with like digital film, where people, films are made with the idea that people are going to get them and later on go through like fucking frame by frame, and look at all those little details. So I mean, those are almost all kind of like Easter eggs. So you have to be, in text, you have to be much more deliberate about, I'm including this particular detail. And actually, this is kind of the video that I haven't shot yet. That every single detail matters, because you can't include everything. So you can only include, if you're good, you can only include what matters. And so it has to stand for, it has to tell you about more than just that one detail.
You know, I'm actually writing some fiction. It's Star Trek fiction, but it's based on the Starfleet battles and Federation and Empire, that universe created by Emerald Design Bureau. So it's a game thing, and so it starts off where it's the beginning of what's ends up being known as the General War, but and of course I'm doing this from the perspective of anyone reading or if it was a movie or whatever, but how to get people to understand that okay, there's a conflict going on. And so I basically have one character is being transported to a conference where things go belly up, and they're having the characters basically argue about what's about to happen. Because they have different, they have different political, they knew each other from before. And now the guy's like, well, this is, but these guys and that, and basically kind of explain, well, I think this because faction X and faction Y, and the other guy, having a different perspective on it. And in that conversation of arguing over what they think is going to happen or should happen, they're letting out the details that the viewer or reader needs to know in a way that's natural, as opposed to a scroll or at one point I thought of having like news reports going on about it in the background, but I said I'd rather have characters talk to one another rather than
Yeah. Another good way to do world building is to show how characters disagree, to just throw in like retorts here and there. Like in the scene I mentioned earlier where, I have the kids watching the documentary. There's this one kid who's only like 5. And she blurts out, yeah, well, my mother says there never was any such thing as land. So, okay, now we know that there are people with like crazy, different beliefs and stuff. And it's just little lines like that can tell you so much about a world. But another thing that helps is how you phrase it. You don't want to make it too robotic or clinical, like somebody's a robot or just reading a Wikipedia article. People are vague. The people speak in a mercurial way, especially when they're passing information along. It's like a game of telephone. So if you want to you can have exposition right out in the open, but dress it up in kind of a weird way. Again, have characters be a little vague. So you get some of the picture, but not the whole picture. You know what I mean?
And sometimes a lot of the time, actually, you all you need is just a little bit, I know Dana, you and I have talked about this a lot recently because we're writing and plotting like upcoming Stuffy videos, and we have like ongoing storylines that we want to set up and kind of, keep afloat for a little bit before they become a focal point. And sometimes it's just, you need just like one line to reference them. And and we mentioned Babylon 5 earlier. There are stretches of Babylon 5 where the big story kind of recedes into the background for a little bit, and there might just be 1 or 2 lines of dialogue that refer to the shadows or something, just to keep that in our mind, so it reminds us that that's still going on. And maybe there's been a little development here and there, but you don't have to devote tons and tons of screen time to it until you're ready to focus on that story,
or porn stars.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, and that's why,
like in Babylon 5.
Yeah. There's one episode of Babylon 5 that it's his first season episode, and it's one of the lesser episodes, and it's one of those ones that people tell new people like, oh, just skip that episode because it's not that great of an episode. But the thing is, there's one scene in one of those 2 episodes. I forget if it was in Believers or TKO, but basically they show somebody reading a newspaper, and there's a little article in the newspaper that talks about something that the Psi Corps is doing. And at the time it seems innocuous, but you realize it's actually a huge little drop in. It's like, so I try to tell people, well, suffer through the episode anyway for that, for that moment, because either that or after you've watched the series, go back and watch that episode, because then you'll go,
yeah. I have to say, because when I rewatched the first season of Babylon 5 recently, I was surprised that I liked it a lot better than I did when I watched it when it was originally on. Because I remember when I almost stopped watching the show when it was originally airing. I think I only kept watching it because it was usually scheduled to. I think it was either right before or right after Deep Space Nine on the channel that I watched Deep Space Nine on. They always programmed them in a block, so it was one after the other, and I would just watch them both. But I thought the first, back in the day in like '93, I guess when it started, like. I thought the first season of Babylon 5 was awful, was just dog shit. And then once Bruce Boxleitner showed up, I was like, okay, this is a little better. But watching it this time, I actually thought it was decent. I think the show, I think the subsequent seasons have been improvements on that for sure. But I didn't think it was bad at all. I was like, oh, and I don't know if that's because I already saw it or because I'm just, you know, my taste has changed or whatever. But I was pleasantly surprised that I was watching it. I was going, you know, this isn't nearly as bad as I remember it being, because I remember it being
just like so much better,
almost
than,
unwatchable.
Like, going back to something, you're like, when you have something, you're like, oh, I remember this, and you're like, oh, can I just go back to remembering it, please?
Well, I'll tell you one of those. There's a movie, Jekyll and Hyde Together Again, which went back in the 80s. I loved that movie. I saw it like 16 times, and on cable. Yeah. And then I saw it again more recently, and I'm like, yeah, like I said, I'll just go back to remembering it. It still has some moments, but it's not this night. Well, but although, and to your point, Steve, about B5, I mean, I remember like this, TKO and Believers are like the two least regarded episodes of season 1, but watching them again, I did another watch through, which is probably it's either my third or fourth watch through, like a few months back, and I was like, hey, these episodes are actually better than they get credit for.
Yeah.
That's just not saying much.
Well, and I see in the live chat, Matthew, you said, you miss Michael O'Hare. He was one, again, when I watched the show originally, I thought he was awful. I thought, how did this guy get this job? He's just terrible. And I watched it this time, and again, I thought, he's pretty good. Like, I don't know if it's because I didn't get what he was doing back then, because I was younger and had, less of a refined palate for watching TV and movies. I hadn't seen as much, and my taste hadn't quite solidified or what. But I watched him this time, and I thought, I think I can't remember why I thought he was so bad, because I thought he was pretty good, actually. Yeah. And then someone, and Russell in our Hangout chat, or our Zoom chat, said about this. People said the same thing about the first season of Deep Space Nine, and it's one of those sort of, it's become kind of conventional wisdom to certain people in the Star Trek fan base. Is like, well, the first season of all the shows sucks, and the odd numbered movies suck, and it's like, I don't think either of those is true. I mean, I think a lot of the odd numbered movies are terrific, and I think obviously the first season of original series is the best season of that show and is great, and the first season of Next Generation is pretty bad. I think that's where the conception comes from, because the first season of TNG is pretty rotten, but the first season of Deep Space Nine is really good, and I will stand behind that, no matter what.
Well, agreed. I was gonna say, and also Star Trek 3 is actually, I like that movie a lot.
It's terrific.
Yeah, and even five suffers from bad production values because the budget was like half of what the budget was for Star Trek 4.
Yeah, but
the overall story isn't bad.
Well, and it has. I've always thought that and people on Twitter were talking about it, because I retweeted the account No Context Star Trek tweeted a screen cap of the moment from Star Trek 5 when Kirk says, "What does God need with a starship?" And there are isolated moments in Star Trek 5 that I think, and they're almost all character moments, that stand up with anything from the other better movies. And one of them is, I feel like it's like the quintessential Captain Kirk moment, where they're on this planet, they're before this apparently really awesome being that, for all they know, is God, is literally God. And they're standing there staring at the face of God, and God is telling them what he wants from them and what the deal is. And Captain Kirk, in response to God, says, "Excuse me." And it's like, that is the perfect Captain Kirk moment, where he's standing in front of the face of God, and he's like, I wait a minute, I have some questions.
Can you imagine if Q appeared right then, and it's just like, bitch, please.
God, okay.
So come on.
Well, and that and then my other one of my favorites is the moment with Kirk and Cyblock when he's like, "I need my pain."
Yeah, that was
and a great,
and that's actually a callback, a kind of sort of a callback to The Enemy Within, when Kirk gets split by the transporter accident, and where his intellect is in one body and his animal nature is in the other, and basically neither can function without the other.
Yeah. Sorry, just two things I want to say about Star Trek that I think are pretty underrated. One is like later TNG, because I consistently hear from people, oh, the last couple seasons are kind of like, yeah. But I've seen some season 7 episodes and they've been really good so far. Like I love the one where Data gets abducted and the guy's like, you better be as entertaining with my guests as you've been with me. And then Data just trolls him by being completely motionless for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
It's great.
Season 7 wasn't just Sub Rosa.
No.
The other thing,
there are some good season 7 episodes.
I think the TNG movies are pretty underrated. I haven't seen all of them yet in full, but I like Generations quite a bit. I love First Contact and Nemesis. That should have been so much better than it was. I don't even think it's that bad, but I see a lot of missed potential. What really bugs me is when you have an amazing setup, you know, like a great aesthetic for a film, and then it just like the whole scene where Shinzon is introduced. Just a wet fart. The whole scene where Shinzon is,
that's a technical term.
It's just, I feel like Nemesis had an opportunity to be a really cool Star Trek movie. That just this weird, sickly green region of space it's in, and Shinzon's whole introduction where his ship comes out and it's just evil as heck, and it, like, you don't even see him at first. It's just one of his henchmen, and even just the scene where he's like walking down the stairs and he's completely shaded, and then you see who he is. I'm like, what the fuck? Yeah. Perfect setup for like a really cool villain, and then
nothing.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's I mean, there's a lot of things like that. Well, actually, that's how I kind of feel about The Force Awakens, you know, because that whole time in that movie, like, I kept getting pissed off because I was like, I'm not happy with what's going on. And then, you know, then they would do something to move on to the next thing. And I'm like, oh, all right, well, all right, that could be good. Let me see where they go.
Nope, not that either.
It was just a constant series of letdowns, like good setups and big letdowns. And but I would say when it comes to world building, I think I mean, I don't do a lot of writing, but I think I can get along with Dana, because I think we're probably more similar on the world building. You know, the importance of detail, of consistency in details.
I will say, and you know,
you would have loved it. We could have had a conversation about the variant theologies within the Husky religion. And I was like, I was ready for this. I'm like,
oh, the split between the
starting, and how long have they been there? And he's like, I don't care. I'm like, but
and that actually, there are, and I've told you this in private, Dana, and it's true. There are times. I mean, obviously, not just in writing, but in everything. Like there are times when it's good to be challenged on what and to sort of be pushed off of what your natural position would be. Because when she and I are writing fanfic together, and when we're writing stuffy scripts and stories, you know, there have been times where Dana I'll say, oh, well, you know, here's an idea for X, Y, and Z, and Dana will fixate on this, to me, completely irrelevant detail that I don't give a shit about, and we'll talk about it, and from that we'll grow this really good idea that, you know, we can use. And if I had just, you know, blown it off, we wouldn't have got it. And one of the things, we decided that there are different sort of schools of theology in the Husky religion, other than the one that we are familiar with from the older episodes, and the schism between them is for the funniest reason that I don't want to say here, but I mean, it's just a really funny idea of like, this is where the schism in the church happened, and I don't think I would have gotten there myself.
I'm convinced we haven't talked about this yet, but there are other schisms. You know, with you know, it's a whole series of diagrams, and I'm like, I could go on what I think about, you know, Husco and Son of Husco and all this.
I like the idea of a Husky anti-disestablishmentarianism.
Exactly.
Yes, the Husky. It's closer. It's something more akin to the Husky hypostatic union. But I won't go any further than that. But I think it's a really funny idea.
Well, here's the thing too. You look at how sometimes those little details can make something actually really good. The reason why there are 3 branches of the elves in Lord of the Rings and in Tolkien's world is that he's trying to have this language that has a history to it, because he realizes, you can't have language without, because he's basically trying to invent a language, and he needs to have a history for the language. And then he realizes, well, if you have beings that are effectively immortal, the language is not going to morph that much, because people remember, if I live, if we all live for 6,000 years, we're going to remember everything, and so the language is going to kind of go forward without very little variation. But if the branches split off early and they're separated from one another and develop their own languages, and then they come back and now they're interacting with one another, and each of their languages are influencing one another. Now there's a reason why there's these all these dialects and tones, and there's a growth to the language, and that made Lord of the Rings more interesting.
Yeah. There's one more Star Trek related thing I would like to say, and it's just like, as an autistic person, I love Data. I swear, like, the more I see of him, the more I love him. Now, I've always felt this is a little problematic to have, like, robot characters that could be autistic coded because of the stereotypes levied against us. People saying that we don't feel emotions, or that we don't feel empathy, or whatever, and you're just acting like we're just soulless robots. But I love how Data, even though he keeps insisting that he does not feel emotions, he clearly does. Just in a subtle way, but he has no frame of reference, and he doesn't feel them the way normal humans do. So he doesn't know. But it's clear, like, from his actions and so on. But a big part of it is, like, yes, the way he talks to people is mostly mimicry. He's trying to make people feel comfortable around him, and that's why he's like memorized all the facial tics and how to convey whatever he's going for. But that's the same story with people like me. When we're kids, and even when we're older, there's so many social cues that people treat as natural, that we're just expected to know, that are like so arbitrary. If people just arbitrarily decided some time ago that, oh, this facial expression means this, or this gesture means that. And like, why do we do stuff like this? So for me, a big part of it was just mimicking and copying other people, until I eventually came to associate it with the same feelings that they do. It's just like a cultural osmosis thing. So even in Data's case, I have to wonder, at what point does he stop just mimicking human behavior, and at what point is he actually doing it?
Right. There's a really good scene in an episode of Next Gen. I forget which one it is, but I think it's relatively early on. It's maybe season 3, but it might be later than that. But where Picard is listening to a recording of Data playing the violin. And Data like comes in to give him a report about something, and Picard's like, "Hey, I'm listening to your violin concert. It's really good." And Data says, "Well, that's I mimicked the styles of," and he names like 2 really legendary violinists, and he's like, "So you should really you're impressed by them, not by me." And Picard says, "Oh, but you chose those 2 particular violinists and those particular styles, and you blended them into something new. So even though you say you're just mimicking people, you're actually creating something of your own through that." And so the show kind of is, the writers of the show are smart enough to be aware that at a certain point it just becomes Data. You can't it goes beyond, well, he's just copying human behavior.
And
no, he's doing his own thing.
That's all art is. Nobody makes something completely 100% original. We're just taking bits and pieces of things we've seen and rearranging them and adding a bit of ourselves into
expanding on that, I mean, that's how humans learn, emotional expression as well. Like it's performative at first for young people, but it is the performance of it that internalizes it. So, I mean, the fact that it's deliberate at first and conscious for someone, an autistic person it's happening at a later period, perhaps. But I mean, it's exactly the something. I mean, as a teacher who's learned about child development, that's how it works. Period.
It's just like in Data's case, it can for a time feel kind of hopeless. Like, oh, I'll never understand why people think this way or whatever. But eventually you do.
But in the way that you kind of have this relation with Data, this is the reason why I don't like the new Star Trek movies, the Abrams verse, because of what they did to Spock. Because growing up as a kid in the early 70s, of a mixed race person, when that was not common, and you caught hell from both white people and from black people too, for different reasons, and So I identified with Spock, the man of two worlds that fit in neither except on the Enterprise. That was the one place he was home, because that was the one place he was accepted, and he wasn't accepted anywhere else. He wasn't accepted on his home world. He wasn't accepted in the greater society. So then when J.J. Abrams takes that from the character by destroying Vulcan and basically having Spock go, fuck it, I'm not going to try to be a Vulcan anymore. Like, well, then that's what made him an interesting character. That's what made me relate to him in the first place.
Well, and there's something that both I want to make this point, and then we'll wrap it up because we're past the hour. But with both what Nick is saying about Data, and also I think it applies as well to Spock, who is sort of the Data is kind of like the inheritor of the Spock role. He's clearly intended to be TNG's version of Spock, and it's to his credit and to the writer's credit and Brent Spiner's credit that he transcends that and becomes his own thing. But they're both unemotional characters, but neither one of them is portrayed as uncaring or cold or lacking in empathy. I mean, Dr. McCoy often accuses Spock of these things, but you rarely see that from Spock, at least not in ways that really matter. Like when lives are at stake, like Spock is not just a cold calculating computer who is like, well, we'll save 5 lives and kill 3 people because the math says, what I mean? He's not like that. There's
it's just not demonstrative. That doesn't mean he's unemotional.
Yeah, well, there's a moment. There's a great episode of the original series called The Galileo 7, where Spock and McCoy and a couple of other characters are in they're trapped on a planet because their shuttlecraft is malfunctioning and they can't lift off to go back to the ship. And there's some kind of transporter rigmarole that they can't just beam them back up. So they're stuck on the planet and they're being attacked by these creatures that are posing a serious threat to them. And some of the members of the landing party are like, let's just kill these things. Like they're attacking us and they're a threat and we don't know how long we're going to be here. Let's just kill them. Right. And Spock doesn't want to, because he says, we're on their planet and they are a form of life here that deserve to exist. And if we don't have to, I'm not going to start killing them, even if they are a threat to us. And that's not from the perspective of like survival, like that's not a logical thing. That's a moral position. That's an ethical position. And it's not necessarily rooted in any kind of emotion, but it's beyond the cold calculating computer, stereotype. It's important to him to respect other forms of life, just as it is to Data. Data is the same way. Whether he feels empathy or not, he acts as though he does. He behaves empathetically toward other people and with respect toward other people.
Well, before we stop, this is the most important point I've ever made on this show. Okay, look. For me, like, there's a difference between feeling emotions and acting on them, and you don't have to feel something to do the right thing. I guess is what I'm trying to say. When Data says, I can give Law my attention, but I can never give her my love. What he doesn't understand is that is loving someone. Yeah. Love is an action. You are what you do. I've never cared for phrases like what's in somebody's heart or what they're really like inside. That stuff's immaterial to me. I care about what somebody does and how they help or harm, other people. So Data might not think he loves Lao, but by taking care of her and by, trying to be a good dad, he is, through his actions, loving her. Right.
Yeah. I mean, one real thing, last thing I want to say on Spock, is if you remember the episode Journey to Babel. Yeah. Where Spock's mother is on there and she's trying to convince Spock to relinquish command and take care of his father. And she's basically saying, isn't there some of me in there? I remember when you were a boy and the other boys teased you for, not being fully Vulcan and all this kind of stuff. And in fact, he had a pet. And even when, you can see that it hurts him, that when his mother slaps him, it's not the physical pain of being slapped. It's the rejection of being rejected by his mother for taking the position that he's taken. And he wants to, he does, despite the, we don't have any emotions bullshit, he cares about his father. He wants to save his father. Clearly. But he recognizes his duty more. And he's not willing to trade over that duty for his own personal gain, even though it's going to hurt him. And again, that's still a calculation. It's still a moral decision, because he's like, I'm responsible for these other people. but he's not doing it from a lack of emotion. He's definitely emotional. Even though he doesn't, he tries to pretend that he doesn't. And then I love the little ruse they use to trick him.
Oh yeah, where Kirk's like, I'm fine, I'm good, go ahead. And then as soon as he's out the door, Kirk's like, oh fuck. He does. He like Wesley in Princess Bride, where like he has enough energy to stand up and raise the sword, and then as soon as the guy's out of the room, he's like, oh fuck. Thank God that worked. Kirk did it first. Anyway, so thanks everybody for joining me as always, both to everybody who's in the call with me here and for everybody watching. Don't forget we do this once a month, and if you are either a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives or a channel member, which you can become by clicking the join button, you can join me for one of these once a month. I really appreciate it. Don't forget the charity links linked in the description to help out some of our friends who need a helping hand. If you have a few spare bucks that you want to use to help out someone who needs the help, we would really, really appreciate that. And I guess that's it. Thanks again, everybody, for being with me. Thanks for watching. And
Social Justice Alchemy in an hour, but yeah.
Social Justice Alchemy in an hour. There you go. Everybody go watch that. And we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.